Joining us now to break down the president's trip to Kenosha and what this issue means more broadly is Liz Harrington, the national spokesperson for the Republican National Committee. So Liz, this of course follows another weekend of unrest, another weekend, this time in Kenosha, Wisconsin, following weeks of unrest in Portland, Seattle, New York, Chicago. The list goes on and on. So let me ask you, what is the president's goal, or what should the goal be going to Wisconsin today?
It's to show what we stand for as Americans, that we will not allow these radical left-wing domestic terrorists to destroy what our country is, what we stand for, our values, and literally our livelihoods. And what's happening here, what's been happening for months in left-wing cities enacting left-wing agendas who've been elected by left-wing voters. I mean, these aren't cities that vote Republican. They've been enacting the Biden-Harris agenda. We've seen it. They're defunding the police in Seattle, in Portland, in Minneapolis, in New York City, in LA. They're doing what the Biden-Bernie manifesto says. They're reimagining policing. And look at the results. They're devastating. And so for Democrats to wake up to the fact that, oh, the left-wing mob will also come to swing counties in Kenosha, in Wisconsin, and suddenly they're going to take a very weak stance and say, oh, maybe these weren't mostly peaceful. Maybe what's been happening in front of our eyes for months was not a peaceful protest. It's not enough. And President Trump will always show up. He'll always do the right thing, and he'll always call out this evil for what it is. These are radicals who hate this country, who want to destroy it. We used our convention all week to highlight the contrast of what America truly is, why we are great, what values we stand for, and what's at stake in this election. And we reached out across all party lines and said, there's a better way. Vote Republican. And you know what happened? We were met with screaming left-wing lunatics in the street accosting us when we left. These people do not want to debate. They want power. And it's our job as Americans to stand up for what we believe in and not allow this to happen. And that's what President Trump did today in Kenosha.
And of course, this is something that a lot of people have seen happening in the inner cities. I mean, no matter where you look, Portland is the example that we keep using, but it's something that we've seen now for the better part of 4 months, and we've seen crime increase in almost every major U.S. city. And for the longest time, nobody really batted an eye. I mean, the Democratic leadership, for example, was supporting these demonstrations to a large degree, but now we see it happening in places like Kenosha, Wisconsin, a key swing district and a key swing state. Last night, we talked to Jeannie Ives, who's about a half hour, 45 minutes outside of Chicago, and she was saying that this is becoming a pivotal, defining issue of her race as well, a House race right out there. And so it's starting to see that the actions happening in the inner cities are now trickling into more competitive suburb-type seats. Do you think that's why the Biden campaign is now pivoting on this issue?
Of course, it's politics. It's their internal poll numbers. But that's what's really sad, because they've been allowing this to happen for months in cities that they control, top to bottom, that are run by left-wing Democrats. And they don't care that people have died in these cities. They don't care that violence persists night after night. But you know when they start to care is when it affects their power come November. They think, oh, this could jeopardize Wisconsin. They had all week at their convention to call this out. And Joe Biden to this day is not calling it out by name. We know what's going on here. It's Antifa, it's Marxist organized activists that run under the cover of Black Lives Matter. They are out to destroy this country. And it's really that insidious ideology behind it. It's the weakness of the Ted Wheelers of the world allowing it to happen. But it's also what's happening where I'm broadcasting right now in Washington, D.C., where this is a town that voted 90% for Hillary Clinton. And now you can't go to a restaurant without being accosted and humiliated and traffic blocked if you get in their way. This is what happens when you appease radical movements, when you defund the police. They voted to defund the police in D.C. as well. When you let this radical ideology in, and Joe Biden won't call it out, he's going to be tough on rioters. His campaign bailed out the rioters in Minneapolis. They bailed out a man who shot and tried to kill police officers in Minneapolis. That is appeasement. That is enabling this radical movement. And it's not calling it out by saying, oh, all violence is bad. Oh, all on both sides? Is that what you're saying, Joe Biden? You're not calling out the radical movement that your party has embraced. And that's why he's not calling it out, because it's his base of voters.
Yeah, and you bring up Washington, D.C. as an example, and just yesterday we saw a study that said that right now homicide rates are at a 12-year high. I mean, it's something that is incrementally be climbing up, but right now it's something like we've never seen before, and a lot of people are saying that is because police are essentially handcuffed. So I guess it's a pun to use regarding police, but that's essentially what a lot of people are saying regarding this. But I do want to touch on something really quick before I let you go. We heard Joe Biden say that this is violence that is taking place in President Trump's America. We heard Ted Wheeler, as you mentioned right there, saying that this is all an offshoot of what President Trump's rhetoric is doing, despite the fact that we've seen, I think it's 70 days or something like that of unrest in Portland, not to mention that there was unrest there before the George Floyd protest. So what is your response to the argument that this is an event that is taking place in President Trump's America?
President Trump is the president of all Americans. That's why even in these Democrat-run cities where they're enacting the Biden-Harris agenda, he said, please call. We will send in the National Guard and restore order. It worked in Kenosha after days, after their feckless governor took days and finally urged at the president's direction saying, Governor Evers, you have to allow us to bring in the Guard. And he did. We restored order. They've rejected this for months. And you cannot shift the blame after months of gaslighting the American people and saying this is mostly peaceful. They literally want to tell us that we can't believe our eyes and ears anymore. And it's really sickening. And for Joe Biden not to be able, there's no illusions about who's committing the violence here. I experienced it leaving the White House, Senator Paul. If that would have happened to Democrats, can you imagine what the media hysteria would be? Joe Biden didn't even mention it in his remarks. I think it's appalling, and he's not mentioning who's committing the violence. It's meaningless if you don't. Donald Trump's America will restore peace and prosperity, what we already had before the pandemic and what we're coming back in the Super V recovery. That is what we know will happen in a second term, and will restore law and order as long as Democrats put their constituents first, put Americans first, and put politics out of this. Do your number one job, which is to protect the rights of law-abiding citizens.
Right, and you bring up the National Guard troops as well, and we have seen success on that effort, whether it's been Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., Seattle. I mean, there's been different situations, Portland, where they have put National Guard troops there, and you do see the unrest at least be quelled a little bit. I mean, it's something that as soon as they leave, it ticks up again, but there is evidence to suggest that it is helping out in those situations. You just can't write about it in the New York Times, otherwise they'll take down your editorial like Tom Cotton learned the hard way. But Liz Harrington, I appreciate you coming on the show tonight, breaking down this issue for us. Thank you.